හිතෙන ජීවිතේ.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And a jolly good evening to you. This is Newsline Live. We're sorry about the couple of minutes late, but traffic held our guest up, and there you have it. Once in a way, eh? Now then, Sri Lanka is in the midst of one significant economic crisis. There are children who are fainting in school, probably because quite often a number of children are actually leaving home without a proper breakfast. Babies and pregnant mothers have been affected because of the lack of triposha. With the price of chicken and therefore eggs gone up, provision of protein is becoming a problem. In between all this, one would imagine that our parliament ought to have got its priorities right. And when we hear from the former chairman of the Committee on Public Enterprise, COPE, when we hear from that former chairman, Professor Shauketaly, that his proposals to Parliament, so to give him as the head of COPE the right to ask the Attorney General to intervene in certain matters that COPE may have found out, lo and behold, the Parliament actually refuses that. Remember, Parliament is the final arbiter on all matters financial. His second proposal, that as the head of COPE, that the head of COPE, whether it's Professor Herat or whoever it may come in the future, should be able to invoke the actions of the AG on specific matters on behalf of COPE and therefore on behalf of Parliament, that too was rejected. Not to be outdone, Professor Shauketaly also suggested that the Attorney General's representative ought to be able to sit in on COPE meetings. Well, you probably guessed it, that too was turned down, which I think is one hell of a how do you do, considering that Parliament is responsible for public finances. So it appears that Parliament doesn't seem to want to address it, or there are other issues. To find out if there are other issues, we've got here a person with wide experience in serving Parliament, not as a member of Parliament, but in the administrative staff. He's right here, Mr. Lasil De Silva. Very good evening to you, Lasil.
Good evening to you, Faraz.
And thank you very, very much indeed for being on Newsline Live. We much appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure to be with you always, Faraz.
Especially, I suppose, because you're doing it in the interests of the public.
Certainly, and it's in the best interest of the country.
Thank you, and thank you so much. Now then, you know, this whole business, Shauketaly is in the newspapers this morning in the island to say that what I've just said, that, you know, his seemingly good proposals in the interest of transparency, in the interest of probably going some way towards eradicating corruption, has been turned down by Parliament itself. COPE, he said he wanted to invoke that COPE should have the ability to ask the AG to investigate whatever it is, because COPE is a fact-finding mission, isn't it? But seriously, they have disregarded all this. Why is this sort of I don't care attitude, or is it I'm all right, Jack, and therefore this is how it's going to be, and you can do aragales and you can do what you like, but once you've given us the vote, well, you know, so be it for the next 4 years or 5 years.
That is wrong. That is wrong. Now,
but that's how it appears to me, that they don't care.
It is probably because they don't...
Well, the majority don't care.
Yeah. They do not understand the responsibilities cast upon them. Basically, members of Parliament have a role. Now, fortunately, I brought this. Parliament faltered in deterioration of public finances. Why?
Right. This is the island of some
A couple of weeks ago.
Yes, 16th of September. And again, this too is written by Mr. Shaminder Ferdinando, the editor of the news editor.
Yeah.
Parliament faltered for deterioration of public finances. This is exactly what Professor Charita Hera is saying.
But this is another story for us, because Article 148 gives all the powers to Parliament, and therefore the Parliament is the custodian of all public finances. Right? My question to you, if they have done their part, done their job, do you think that there could be that kind of corruption? Could there be any stories of this nature? Because ours is the oldest parliament particularly in Asia, because in 1931 we got adult franchise, voting rights. Actually it was 2 years prior to that only they got it in England, and 2 decades later in India. Look at India, right, far ahead of us. Look at Bangladesh. I mean, they got independence in 1971. It is on paper they had only $17 in an account at the time they got independence. They were terribly broke, and at the time they when they started, Henry Kissinger had come there, and he had said Bangladesh was a basket case.
It's an international basket case.
That's what right. Said. Today Sri Lanka is a basket case, they say. Why? Now let me go back to the question that you raised. In Sri Lanka, this is not the first time. Now the present Minister of Justice, as the chairman of COPE, he even submitted a number of reports, and he said that he wants action taken on all those reports, right? Divugudasekara did the same thing with regard to central bank fraud, right? And again, Sunil Handunnetti. I would tell you there are enough reports to cover entire parliament, right? None of those reports have been actioned. No action has been taken. That involves billions, right? What a shame. So whose fault is that?
Has to be the parliament.
Definitely. Fault lies with the parliament, because it is the place. Now go back to Act number 19 of 1994, where GL Pires himself on the floor of the House, as the Minister of Justice, he said they will be turning a new lease of life in the country, and there will be no corruption.
This is Act 19,
Act number 19 of 94, establishment of this corruption commission, which is at London Place.
Yes.
And having enacted a law, right, having given powers by the Constitution to look after the monies of the country, right, whose fault is that? We are paying for their sins, I would say. We have not faulted. We have bought, fuel, all that.
Paid cash.
On the spot, right? Unfortunately, they are not in a position to do that. Why? Now, Charita Hera himself said about this fraud. Actually, with regard to this gas, right? It was a friend of mine who gave me all those details, and I said I am not a very good fighter to fight that way. I gave to Naga, right? It was Naga who did that job. Actually, it was in the end, it was about 1.3 billion rupees loss. Why are we paying a higher rate? And can't the members of parliament see that the people are being taxed unnecessarily? Actually, whose fault is that again? Fault of the parliamentarians, right? Parliamentarians do not know their job. And also, for that matter, I would say, Parliament has not done their part in order to look after the finances, or with regard to any of those issues that we are now confronted with, the issue that we are facing now. Again, whose fault is that, right? You are fully well aware there are issues where if somebody robs maybe a coconut or pluck a jack from a jack tree or whatever, this is particularly because they are starving, right? There have been instances, I would say, I have my highest respect to the judiciary, but it is the judiciary also that who has got the powers. It says what is this? Enforce, vindicate, you know, actually they have the powers to ensure that people are taken care of, right?
Yes, but I see what you're saying, but you can hardly fault the judiciary if they're acting within the law, you know, and that is their job.
That's their job, and they are paid for that.
They're paid to do that, and they're paid to uphold that, and to implement it, you know. So you can hardly expect them. You can't expect them to say not guilty, when in fact, if somebody is actually guilty. Well, what do you say to that?
Let me quote this way. Now, we have ministers in the cabinet who had been found guilty.
Yes, but they're on a
on a suspended sentences.
I know it doesn't augur well. It doesn't smell right.
Yeah, and also it may not be good to speak out frankly on this forum, because it's bad for you, right? I don't want to say that.
Well, I'm not being vindictive or malicious. I'm just stating a fact. The fact is, whoever this person is has received a suspended sentence which doesn't impinge on parliamentary rules.
Definitely.
So therefore, either one has to fix the parliament rules so that...
Who does that?
Well, the parliamentarians themselves. So we're back to square one.
And similarly, now there was a court case where Telecommunication Authority funds were used for purchasing Silredi, singular language, right? So naturally, he was convicted.
Yes, but then he was pardoned, wasn't he? Or was he the judiciary? No, he wasn't.
He was
pardoned,
acquitted.
He was acquitted.
He was acquitted, right?
But the point is this. You know, what do you do now? Case in point, you headed the investigation,
corruption commission.
Yes, you know, CBOC.
Yeah, right. Not the CBOC, actually, Presidential Commission on Frauds and.
The serious.
Okay.
So you were there. You were the secretary of that.
Yeah.
Now, you know, you in the end you were removed.
I would say I was kicked out.
You were kicked out. Yes, we had something similar to that on our third floor. On one of our errant journalists was kicked out of the group because he said things that he shouldn't.
I should say I had not done anything which is improper, irregular, or illegal. I did within the powers given to us, in order to sort of bring people, because there was another story during that period that the only sprats were being caught and the sharks had sort of allowed to go away, right? So naturally,
that's how it seemed to me as well.
Yeah. So the Constitution itself says the law must apply to everybody equally and fairly.
Yes, and we've had President Obama say that as well. He said, you know, he's a young man. He's got enough in him. He can quite easily. He felt he could quite easily contest and win again.
But
the law is the law is the law, and therefore he is where he is.
We need a change with people, and we need a good, capable set of people in Parliament who will be committed. Maybe to change all those constitutional provisions, because now US Constitution has only about 27 amendments, and it was enacted in 1776, right? Look at India, right? These two constitutions are far superior to ours. But when I talk about our constitution also, the biggest problem is most of the amendments that they had introduced since the enactment of our constitution was not in order to uplift the masses for the benefit of the people. What did they do? They had done all that to strengthen their hands. Now the 20th example is the most recent example, where they did everything to strengthen the president's hands. What happened? Having got all the powers, having given all the powers, consolidated all the powers in the executive, what happened? I mean, that's not the way how to do that. You have to ensure that the powers are given, and so that everybody is allowed to function independently, even the Parliament for that matter, right? The Parliament has eventually become a rubber stamp, and they are fulfilling the needs probably the head of the state, who happens to be the head of that particular party. Now, in this particular situation, under the present whatever, under this government, is not the case. It is surprising because, you know, your opposition, in the sense your enemy or whoever, in that sense, you know, ultimately was voted in to be the president. So,
but these are special circumstances is calling for special action, I suppose. But on that note, we'll come back and discuss this. We'll take a peek at this evening's headline news. We'll be back.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
Newsfirst headlines. Main sponsor.
Anka eke araksita iti ginipetti. Surya ginipetti.
Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka opposes the use of the Official Secret Act to declare high security zones. 6-hour prior approval is necessary for protests and demonstrations, says Defence Ministry. IUSF's Vasanta Mudalige questioned over speeches. President off to Japan on official visit, appoints 5 acting ministers. Supreme Court says President Wickremesinghe cannot be named as a respondent in the Easter attacks case. Wrong crude oil imports put refinery in limbo. Coastal train travel between Panadura and Port reduced to 20 kilometers per hour.
Newsfirst headlines. Main sponsor.
Anka eke araksita iti ginipetti. Surya ginipetti.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
Welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation with Mr. Leslie De Silva. He wrote, integrity is of paramount importance to the economic and social well-being and prosperity of the whole nation. And he goes on. But, Leslie De Silva, again, thank you for being here. Isn't the epicenter of the corruption that is endemic in our country, isn't the epicenter, or pretty close to the epicenter, isn't it the fact that Sri Lanka lacks a robust political funding law? In Singapore they call it a Political Donations Act.
you know, in 2002 they established this election commission in Sri Lanka, 2001, right?
Yeah.
And that was in order to provide all this, you know, to give them necessary independence and to make it a free and fair election, because elections have to be free and fair. Now, to start with, right, from that day onwards up to now, this issue has been a serious problem, because this goes back to the 70s, in the sense with this, with the introduction of this proportional voting system, right? And you have a bigger electorate, the entire district, right? So what do? Actually, they rob from the government, you know, resort to all kinds of irregularities and actually rob from anywhere they could think of. It could be even medicine, whatever. It could be sugar, it could be garlic, it could be gas, it could be central bank, anything, right? They do all that for what? Because they need money to invest for the next elections. Actually, they rob you and they reinvest, and it has become a lucrative business. Now look at people, some of the ministers maybe towards Kalutara, right? I mean, there are instances, we know, basically we are also a little further down, actually, can such people really think in terms of developing? Because in England and in America, there is a law, there is a limit. Actually, in Sri Lanka too,
there is, but it's not. There was, but it's not being implemented.
Right? So, basic thing is, it is again back to Parliament. The fault lies with the Parliament. Parliament knows that these are crucial issues. Owing to all this, there is so much of corruption in the country.
But you know, listen, if it is, as we just said, that there is such a rule, whose job is it to implement it?
You're right. I think this is exactly the point, right? Now, if there is a problem, let's take, for an instance, the Bribery Act, right? The Act number 19 of 1994, which was really considered to be one of the, you know, I mean, they said they were very proud of all that, having introduced this kind of a bill, a law. Unfortunately, nothing works out. It is the duty.
For a while, I think it worked out when we had that very colourful Ian Vikramanayake as the bribery commissioner.
Yeah, that was long before.
Very long.
That was long before that. Yes.
Indeed.
Now, yeah, this was in 1994.
I just want to say this.
Yeah.
Ian Vikramanayake was also a director at the Capital Maharaja Group. So I thought I better mention that because, you know, we've done a few portraits.
Right. In 1956, it was the last instance where they dealt with 5 parliamentarians, right? And
1956.
Wow,
that was
58. Really.
Yes, you're talking about the latest
SWRD Bandaranaike. Actually, that was about the time when Lee Kuan Yew also came to Sri Lanka. That was in 59.
Yes.
And he
must have been terribly impressed by
the standards
Banda.
that we had maintained at the time, right? And he spoke of Ceylon with a lot of, you know, I mean, he was.
Yes, I know, but this is all like now. It's all in the past. What should we be doing now for the future?
No,
because this can't go on.
Definitely, this can't go on. This is exactly, I mean, a system change that we need, because all what I say, you have to scrap presidency in the first place. Unfortunately, it is the presidency, you know, which destroyed this country to that extent, because it was the president who covered up everybody. Now, even with regard to the matter that you said, spoke of Charita Herath,
yes,
right? Basically, this was the same thing came up. Even when this garlic issue, this, that, and all that came up, right? It is the duty, because he is the head of the executive, head of the government, you know, I mean, he has so much of responsibilities as head of this, head of that, all that, head of the cabinet as well. So naturally, shouldn't he look into all that and, if necessary, tell the guys, because it is under his instructions only the Parliament also wakes up. Otherwise, if it is a Parliament where there was no one to sort of put pressure on, actually, I would like to say it this way: Parliament, the state, right? I mean, it says state capture.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a team of people who have taken over all this in order to, you know, for their personal gain. Let me put it that way, right? Which is corruption. So eventually, as far as I am concerned, all what I personally think is, it is the Parliament back again, which should definitely take the steps, even with regard to this funding. There are enough and more cases the world over where we can definitely try and, you know, implement all that here. And it doesn't happen. Why? Because this is a team who has taken over power, and they have captured the whole system. All what they want is to come back to power and continue in the same basis. So far, having even created such a mess in the country, right? Political, economic, I mean, social, cultural.
Can't any of these people be held legally liable?
Why not? They are totally responsible. They are fully responsible.
Well, we know that some people have gone to petition, I think, the Supreme Court on this matter, and it'd be interesting to wait for
but I don't think, you know, even the Supreme Court, with whatever said and done,
but they can only operate within the framework of the laws.
Yeah, because they
can't be creating laws, because that's not their job.
Even within the framework of the law of laws, I mean, we have seen situations where we couldn't accept, as citizens of the country, and we were quite...
Yes, but unfortunately, sometimes, Lasil, as you know, that we have to operate within the canvas. We can't go beyond the canvas, and because I'm saying this very clearly, because I don't want to be hauled up before the Supreme Court. But although I much enjoy what goes on there, the Supreme Court too can't produce miracles. They can only work within the framework of the law.
Within the rules or within the Constitution, they are in a position to do that. Now see, here I have said Article 105(1) of the Constitution states, subject to the provisions of the Constitution, the institutions specified therein, including the Supreme Court, should ensure that the administration of justice should be aimed, I have put it in inverted commas, to protect, to vindicate and enforce the rights of the people.
Absolutely.
So,
and I believe that if you speak to any judge serving in the Supreme Court, I'm sure they won't deviate from that. But the fact is that children are fainting. I'm back to this whole thing. Children are fainting. Babies, pregnant mothers got no triposha. We are told by some sections that the country is headed towards a 10-hour power cut in case the coal doesn't arrive. In the meantime, we have the government forward thinking and quickly imposes a high security zone in all sorts of jolly places. And whilst I agree, of course, that you can't have the president's office being blocked and so on, the point is that whilst all this is happening, who is thinking about the people who cannot afford 3 meals a day? Some can't even afford 2 meals a day. So until I'm blue in my face, I'm asking the same question. When will our elected officials come to their senses and have some form of compassion, which is cornerstone of any religion?
If they had compassion, by now they would have, we would have been able to see it. Actually, they have no compassion whatsoever. Actually, they are only oriented, looking at one aspect, how to come back to power again, because they are scared. Ranil Wickremesinghe himself had said, if in case another group takes over, that they'll be in trouble, which will definitely happen, So
Lasil, as we come to the end of this end of this interview, it's sad though, because it really does pain me to keep asking the same thing over and over again, in the hope that our politicians, our lawmakers will actually listen. Do you think, Lasil, this is the last 10 seconds of the program? Do you think that this will ever happen? You've got 10 seconds.
Unfortunately, I don't think under them they will never do anything, because if there is anything that could be done, there's a lot to be done at this particular moment, right? This is a crisis where they can find solutions. 1991, India, there was a dollar crisis. What did Manmohan Singh do? There is not a single Manmohan Singh in this parliament at all.
And on that note, thank you very much. There is no Manmohan Singh, but we have the news about to start. So thank you, take care, and as always, God bless you all.